All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Emil Pierce, and in this video, I'm going to show you the basics and how to get started with Novu. So this is Novu's homepage. I assume that if you're watching this, you probably came across some of the features, maybe some of the channels that Novu is able to communicate and basically just handle for you. For example, the channels that we have here are in-app, push, email, SMS, and chat being kind of Discord, Slack, Microsoft Teams, and whatever. Anyway, so I'm just going to make a very kind of long, okay, I hope not long, but a thorough explanation of step-by-step guidance. So once you decided that you want to create an account, you're going and clicking on Get Started, and a new window is going to pop up here. And this is the authentication screen, the authentication component that you can either authenticate with GitHub or authenticate using Google. Because I already have my main account or my official account on both of those, like I already have an authentication there, I will just create a new account. I will call it Emil Pierce. I will use my email here, but because this email is already in use, I will type demo1 password. Yeah, whatever, why not? I'm not going to save it. And the next step is verify my email. So I'm going to go to my email. I'm going to check what is the verification code that I've received. Yeah, so this is the verification code I received, and I authenticated my email. The next step is creating an organization. So basically, once I've created an account, I'm creating an organization for Novu Cloud. I'm going to call it Emil Demo 1. Create organization. I'm going to select a job title. Try whatever. If you're a founder, click that you are a founder. If you're doing marketing, do that. Maybe if you're a student, whatever. I'm going to pick engineer, and my choice of backend stack is Node.js. But you also can pick wherever from here. Get started with Novu. Good. I'm going to put myself here. As you can see here, this is the first screen that you will see, the Get Started screen. Here we have a few frameworks that you can start with. Initialize your first project, run your application, and execute the local studio. But I'm going to mainly focus on this video on Next.js. And if you are not really interested in going over all this onboarding process, you can always hide the Get Started from the menu. Once it's going to be clicked here, the Get Started is going to disappear, but I'm not going to do it now. If, like before, I'm going to actually initiate all the project and the application and everything, I'm just gonna go with kind of a quick onboarding of the application. Here you can see you can log out, you have the settings, access security, organization, team members, you can add your team. Here you have the workflows, the predefined workflows. The workflows that we have here, they are active and being displayed here as a placeholder. Like when we will push our workflow, then all those workflows are going to disappear. So basically those are boilerplate workflows that you can just review and see how it looks like. So we have here, for example, comment on task. So we have 3-stage or 4-stage workflow if you are counting the trigger, which is the inbox notification, comment digest, and comment email. So what's happening here, again, we're not really going to get too deep into those workflows, but just so you will understand, this is the first stage. So the workflow here is being triggered, for example, once a comment is being commented, for example, on a task. So this is going to trigger this workflow. Once, for example, a user is commented on a task, it's going to initiate this workflow. And the first step is the inbox notification. The inbox notification here will look like that. We have the preview stage, we have the step controls, the payload, and I'm going to slightly go over what it actually is and why it's useful and why you should care about it. Then we have here the digest step, which is basically aggregating all the comments in a time period of 10 minutes. So it will not just bombard the user with all the notification. It would actually collect and wait to receive all the notifications that will trigger this workflow. And then all those notifications are going to be digested and be sent as an email. So in this email, you will see all the notifications that were received, for example, this task, product mockup diagrams or something. So again, you can definitely kind of go over those pretty common use cases. Here we have demo apartment review. So again, we have the trigger here. We have the delay for review. Here we can see the delay. It means that once the trigger is initiated, it's going to wait 1 week. And after 1 week, it's going to execute the next step, which is send an email. So here is the latest review from John. So this is, for example, I don't know, an Airbnb review, for example, right? And again, as you can see here, we have a bunch of examples of the step controls and the payload. But again, we're going to touch this a bit later. We have a bunch of other workflows here. Password reset, I think this is a very common one. So basically, once a user is pressing the reset password button, like if they forgot their password to your application, then you can initiate this workflow. It could trigger this workflow and send an email to the user with reset password. So again, pretty kind of common use cases. Here you can see the activity feed. Right now it's empty because we just created this account. So it's not really active and nothing really happened yet. Here we have the subscribers. Again, the subscribers is something that currently empty because we have not created any subscriber, which means we have not sent any notification to anyone. The subscriber is the person or the user who is receiving the notification. This is the subscriber, so it does not really exist here for now. And we have, of course, the API keys. As you can see here, we have the secret key. This is the API key. We have the application identifier, and we have the environment ID. One thing to pay attention to is that here we have by default 2 environments. We have the development environment and the production environment. And each environment has its own environment ID, its own secret key, and if I'm not mistaken, its own application identifier. So when you are connecting different when you're actually making the integrations, make sure that when you are submitting or putting the environment variables, make sure that the environment and the environment credentials are correct. So let's go back to the onboarding here. And what we have here, the first command here is npx novu latest init, and we are passing the secret key. So basically what's happening here is once we copy this command and we will go to our IDE, I already prepared here a demo folder. I opened a terminal here and I'm going to paste this command. I'm going to execute this. What is your project name? You can put whatever. I'm just going to go with the defaults. And right now it's basically initiating the project. All right, we will give it a few seconds. Meanwhile, what I could else do, okay, so here, once you're creating an account, this is my organization. So Emil-Novu-1, but I can create multiple organizations. If, for example, you are just starting with Novu, you can create a testing or kind of a demo environment and a demo instance organization to just create the POC for your use case with Novu. But then you can just create another organization which will go to the actual production. So let's run now the second command, because here we see that the initiation of the application was successful. So we're going to change our directory to my Novu app, and we're going to execute the npm run dev. Good. So as you can see here, the application is running. It's running on localhost 4000. It's important, and you will see very soon why. But meanwhile, we're just going to open it here. So we have the localhost 4000. This is a pretty regular Next.js starter application. And inside here, this is where the real reason of why this application exists. One of the reasons why Next.js applications are so powerful is because they also have a server, like they can expose an API and also to communicate directly to the client. So basically it serves both needs. So you don't need an separate, you don't need to separate your front end from your backend application and then try to connect them. It actually sits in one application. So this is the reason why we're using Next.js here. And here you can see, let's start from the workflow. So under the app directory, we have one API directory and then Novu, and then just Novu. And of course, we have the regular page, but it's not really relevant because as you can see, there is nothing really in here. But here under the Novu directory, you can see the workflows. So the workflows here, we have the workflow name, welcome onboarding email. This is the workflow that we get out of the box to basically see how it looks like and how it behaves. Here you can see that we have the workflow. This is the workflow file, the workflow instance. We are importing the instance from Novu framework. And this is a functioning workflow, right? Let's just go step by step of what we can see here. This is the function of the workflow. This is initializing the workflow instance. This is the workflow name. We're going to see it very soon. And we can see here when we are actually executing the workflow instance, the properties that are required or that we are defining that are required for this workflow. Actually, almost in every workflow, we will have step. We will need to have the step property and we need the payload property. When we are adding the step property, we defining the step of the workflow. And it's just going in a chronological type of way. So for example, if I have this step here, I will create another step, but I will call it, for example, in-app. Okay. So the workflow will fetch and see this as the first step, and we'll see this as the next step. All right. So basically, the whole workflow is async, but each step is not really running in parallel. It got to execute this step first in order to get to the next step. Okay. That way we make sure that our workflow actually works as expected. I'm going to revert the changes here because we don't need the second step for now. We have here the name of this step. So right now it's very generic name, but we can change the name to be welcome email, all right? But it could be like whatever you call it if it's something that is important to you. Then we have the controls and the return. So when in the return, we have the subject and the body, all right? The subject is getting the subject default properties from the controls, and the body is rendering an email with the controls and getting a payload as properties. And here we are also defining the control schema, and we have the payload schema. So let's just break it down real quick of what everything is about. So let's start from the controls. Here we have schema.typescript. Here we are importing the email control schema and we are importing the payload schema from this file here. In this file, we can see the payload schema. We're going to close it for now. And we have the email control schema. The email control schema is actually the values and properties that we are enabling for non-technical people per se to change and modify, but we still provide the default values. So for example, here we have the subject property. It's a string, and the default property is a successful test on Novu, which means that the default subject line for the email will be this. Now, we have a few other properties, which is here it's true, it's a Boolean. We have here are different types of components, which we're now going to briefly go over. So going back to the workflow instance, as you can see here, we are also importing an render email function. This render email function actually sits here in Novu onboarding email.tsx. This particular email is using React email. And if you're not really familiar with React email, this is a very powerful and impressive way to build very highly functioning emails and highly customizable emails, and very beautiful ones as well. And yeah, these type of emails are the ones that you can actually use in Novu when you are sending an email. But if you just need another kind of visual reference, I will open it here, React email. So yeah, if you are interested in how it actually looks like and how it behaves, you can go here and actually see what really magnificent emails you can build using and leveraging this package, this project. All right. So we have this email here and we have all the components of the email. So we have different components here. We have the heading, we have the buttons. So basically, this is a template email that you can get. For example, if you want to see some maybe templates of emails, you can see them here. AWS Verify email. This is an email built with React email. And here you can see the code. So basically, what I could do is just copy all of this, paste it here as my email, and to add the control steps, the control schema. But I'm not going really to do that now, but just keep in mind that you can do it. So here you can see we're importing the control schema and the payload schema from the workflow because we want to inject the values from the control and the payload schema into that email. So basically, this is a dynamic email and not something that you need to hard code every time that you are required to send an email. You are actually have one email template. It looks the same. And what changes is only the values that you are injecting from your business logic into here. And in this case, we are defining it in the control schema and the payload schema. All right, so yeah, enough with that. Let's make an attempt to preview how the email and how the workflow will actually look like. So here, if we will go back to the Get Started section, we have run studio command. So as I told you before, something that is very important is that in a Next.js application, we are exposing the route of the workflow. Basically, we're exposing the workflow that is in the Next.js project as an API endpoint here. So the API endpoint is actually API/Novu. And here we are exporting the API endpoint as get, post, and options, and basically serving the API using the workflow instance here. We are importing the workflow onboarding email, which is this one. Here you can see this is the function that it's called. Let's just change it so you will know how it looks like. Let's call it welcome email. Yeah, so this is the only place where we need to change it. And here we are changing it to welcome email, and here welcome email. So as you can see, it should work now. And to run the local studio and to actually preview how the email and the actual workflow will look like, we are opening another terminal here. So this is the running terminal that we have. And I'm reminding you that it's running on localhost 4000. And here, this is another terminal. I'm going back here. I'm going to paste the command of npx novu latest dev. And if you paid attention, you can see here we have dashboard and 4000. So the local studio is actually fetching and getting the workflow using the API from the local host. Okay, so if, for example, my application would run on localhost 3000, then I will need to change the 4,000 to 3,000. So just keep it in mind. I'm clicking on enter and it's executing it. Now, as you can see here, it's actually opened the workflow and the studio in another window. I will show it in a second. But here you can see that we have 4 different URLs. So the first one, I will start from the bottom one. So we see the endpoint, localhost 4000 /API /Novu. As I said, this is the endpoint that we are exposing from our Next.js application. This is the studio URL, but right now, it's the studio URL. So basically, if you will go to this localhost 2022/studio, you will see the local studio instance. Here, this is the Novu dashboard. Basically, it's this one. And this is the tunnel. So this is the local tunnel. Again, I'm going to touch it pretty soon, go over what it actually is. But briefly, the tunnel it actually refers to a local tunnel or a bridge URL. So in order for Novu dashboard or the Novu cloud instance to get your workflow and sync it to the cloud, to here, the Novu cloud instance needs a way to get to your application, to the workflow. And it's doing that by getting to the endpoint here. So the API endpoint. And because trying to sync from a local host to your actual application is not really possible and not really secure, you are generating a local tunnel URL, which is a unique URL that is generating and listening to your localhost 4000, to the port that you are exposing currently. Sorry. Good. So right now I'm going to show you the application of the local studio application that is running right now. So this is the local studio here. And you can see that we have the workflow shown here. So this is a visual representation of this workflow. We have the trigger step and we have the welcome email. Here, if you can recall, when we went over how the React email looks like, this is how it looks like, all right? Maybe it's not the most beautiful out there right now, but the thing is that you really can create it your own. When you are using a template, a React email template, and you want to predefine your components and put all the step variables and all the payload variables inside your template, make sure that you are importing the control schema and the payload schema in there. So again, if we're going back to the local studio here, we see the preview of the email. And here we're just going to go over what is the step controls and the payload is about. So here you can see the subject. If you recall, the subject is here. This is the default value of our email control schema. And it's currently set to a successful test on Novu. The reason why we even need those step controls is to basically help non-technical people, let's say product people or maybe marketing, that just, I don't know, they want to maybe modify the email or modify the title, the copyright, the copy of the email. And we don't want them to disturb the developers. We don't want them to disturb you, all right? So we just want them to empower them to change what they need to change without breaking the template, without breaking the email that we have built. Going back to the subject, for example, the marketing person decide that they want to change, oh, sorry, the subject is here. We're changing the subject. So instead of being a successful test on Novu, here, you can see the subject. It will be hello developer, right? Something like that. And here you can see that we have a bunch of components. So for example, this component is the heading and the text is welcome to Novu. And let's say we want to change, or the marketing person is saying that they think the text should say hello world. All right. But we don't want them to disturb or put it as a ticket to your cycle just to change one thing. And we don't want them to be heavily dependent on you just to change some text in an email template. Like, your time worth much more than that, and you can use it for much better things, like actually focusing on creating the application and concentrating on the core value of your service. Kind of modifying an email, come on, it could get very stupid, all right? So that's what the step controls is solving. The same goes for the payload. So for example, the payload here, we set as a default 3 different variables with images just to show. But for example, when the trigger is being triggered here, we can see that every time the payload will get something, or we can make it to get something. For example, the username, the user avatar, the file name, etc. So if we want to get, right now I will go to my GitHub profile, and I will just copy the link to my profile image. And I will paste it here. Okay. I just able to modify this, but what it actually means to show you is that when the trigger is being triggered, you are expecting payloads within the trigger with, for example, the avatar image, or with the username, or with, I don't know, if you are connecting it to your database, then maybe with an account ID or something like that. And you put it in your template as variables. In this example of the, so in this example of the AWS Verify email, you can see here that there are a bunch of different variables that can be passed in the payload. For example, the verification code. This is something that should be dynamically generated, like in your database or with your authentication service or provider. What else? Maybe in this email, we have a newsletter here. So here you can set dynamic values of the dates. Let's go maybe to receipts. So here you have an Apple receipt. You have a dynamic variable number 1, the invoice date, the order ID, the document ID, the billing information. Basically, you have so many variables here. Like, all those variables are dynamic variables that are expected to be passed within the trigger payload. And that way you are able to just use those payload variables in your email template without really trying to hack your way into injecting those variables inside. So again, those step controls is mainly for kind of design, email modification purposes, but all that without breaking the email. This is the very important thing. Good. So what we're going to do is right now to basically trigger this email. But before that, just you can see here on the side, this is the welcome onboarding email. This is the name of the workflow. So if we will go here, this workflow, and we'll change it to onboarding email, you can see here that the name is changed. And if you want to add another workflow, you can do it again using code. So for example, here we have another instance, but if we'll go back to this code example, we're going to just copy all of this. We're going to paste it here. We will change to maybe hello again. And we will call it engagement email. So this is, we basically just created another workflow, which we need to call. So as you recall here, every time I'm creating a new workflow, I need to provide to export the workflow to the API for the local studio to get it. So now you see that we have two workflows here. But for example, if I want to make the second workflow a bit more robust, so what I can do is just take this. I will call this in-app. Of course, I don't really need, like, I will just type hello again. And the subject is hello again. And let's change the body. How are you doing? Here we don't really need the control schema for this step because this is an email schema, but we can configure in-app control schema. So just keep it in mind, but for now, I'm just going to delete it. So here we're just not really using any controls. And if we will go here, you will see that okay. So you see the session is expired. We're going to renew the session here in the terminal. Good. So we renewed the session. For some reason, I don't see let's just make sure that everything is correct. Welcome email. Oh, I think that because the name of the step is not unique, it will not show. So you basically, every step should have a unique name. All right. Here. Yeah. So that was the problem. So each step should be defined with its own identifier, its own name. All right. So this is a welcome email step, and this is in-app notification step. And as you can see here, this is the subject and this is the body. And as you can see here, because we did not had We did not add any step controls. We don't have here anything. But we do still have in this workflow the payload, so the payload is the same. All right. So let's just go over two more things, and we will then going to end this particular demo. So now what we're going to do is to sync the workflows into our Novu account. There are three ways to do it. One is manual, another one is via the CLI with a sync command, and with GitHub Actions. The reason why the workflow should live in your application or very close to your application is because the workflow is very dynamic and very feature and data rich. Like you can inject into the workflow almost like basically anything. You can connect your database to it, you can connect your business logic to it, your client events, your server events, and just put it as values, variables, and just inject it as a part of your business logic. And that way, the workflow is very interconnected with a very cohesive user experience that you are trying to create. Therefore, when you are exposing the API endpoint of the workflow, you presumably would have it in a deployed production application, which then will generate a bridge URL that is actually serving as the bridge to communicate with Novu's API. But right now we're going to use the manual sync. So here you can see the tunnel. We're just going to copy the tunnel because, as I told you before, we cannot use the localhost endpoint as it is right now. We need to use this publicly exposed endpoint using the local tunnel. We're pasting it here. As you can see, this is basically the local host, but just with another domain, /API/Novu. We do manual sync. And we can see that the sync was successful and is now in our dashboard. So if we go to our dashboard in Novu, you can see that we just synced our two workflows and this is connected. Okay. So here, this is our workflow. And this is going to be the interface that is going to used by the non-technical people, for example, the marketing team or maybe the product team to just modify things. They're going to use this interface. But for developers, their home, let's call it, or their interaction is still mainly in the code environment, in their kind of, let's call it, natural habitat. And let's just execute this workflow as a test example. It's going to be sent to my email. It's going to send it to my subscriber ID. As you can see here, this is the instance. I can use also the curl command, like from my terminal. We have PHP, Golang, Python, but this is what is going to be executed. And I'm going to click here, test workflow. So we have two steps here. This is the first step. This is the second step. As you can see, we have here a very kind of clear step timeline: step created, step queued, successful bridge response received. This is communicating basically with our currently deployed app. Start sending message, integrate instance selected, message created, message sent. So all of that happened. And once that happened, as you can see here in the activity feed, now we have the workflow that was executed just now. We also have the in-app step. Again, same thing. and you can just see what's happening with each workflow. We are going to discuss it in another video, like how you are adding different channels with different providers. Email, you can connect whatever you want, like SendGrid, MailTrap, MailJet, Post, Mailgun, like whatever. Chat, again, WhatsApp, Slack, Discord, Mastodon, or MetaMorst. This, I just don't know even those stuff. Same goes for push. So Expo Push, FCM, One Signal. You can just connect almost any provider. And if we don't have the provider that you are looking for, you can always just request to add this provider. But the thing is, we are like, what Novu does is handling all of that in the backend. So I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions, any kind of thought, comments, even requests for future videos, please leave them in the comments. And I will see you in the next video. Really, thank you so much for being here, and I hope that it was helpful. Yeah, thank you so much. Bye-bye.